Jacob hurried down the dark city street, his head down against the biting wind. As he turned the corner, something caught his eye, a small figure huddled against the wall, shaking with quiet sobs. Slowing his pace, Jacob approached cautiously, his heart filling with concern. "Excuse me, are you all right?" he asked gently. The girl lifted her head, and Jacob was struck by her striking, almost unearthly beauty. Deep blue eyes shimmered with tears, and her pale face was framed by a tumble of raven black curls. She could not have been more than 16 years old. I'm lost," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where I am." Jacob's brow furrowed with sympathy. "Hey, it's okay. I can try to help you find your way. Where are you trying to get to?" The girl hesitated, chewing her lip nervously. I don't know. I just need to get away from here." Something about her manner, the haunted look in her eyes, the way she seemed to shrink in on herself, set off alarm bells in Jacob's mind. This wasn't simply a lost teenager. There was more to her story. "Well, why don't you come with me?" he offered, keeping his tone gentle and reassuring. "I can take you somewhere safe, where you can call for a ride or figure out what to do next." The girl studied him warily. I don't know. I can't impose." "It's no imposition at all," Jacob insisted. "I'd feel much better knowing you were somewhere warm and out of the cold. Please, let me help you." After a moment's hesitation, the girl nodded shakily. "Okay, thank you." Jacob offered her his hand, and she took it tentatively as he guided her down the street. As they walked, he couldn't help but glance at her from the corner of his eye, his curiosity piqued. There was something deeply unsettling about her, an aura of fear and sadness that clung to her like a dark cloud. When they reached his apartment, Jacob unlocked the door and ushered the girl inside, flicking on the lights. "Here we are. Make yourself comfortable. Can I get you something to drink? Maybe a warm cup of tea?" "Tea would be wonderful, thank you," the girl replied, perching gingerly on the edge of the sofa. Jacob busied himself in the kitchen, his mind racing. Who was this girl, and what had driven her to this state of distress? As he waited for the kettle to boil, he glanced surreptitiously at her, taking in the fine features, the delicate bone structure, the way she held herself with an innate grace and poise. She was clearly no ordinary runaway or lost child. Carrying the steaming mug of tea, Jacob settled onto the armchair across from her. "So, what's your name?" "Isabel," she said quietly, wrapping her hands around the mug. "It's nice to meet you, Isabel. I'm Jacob." He paused, then added gently, "If you don't mind me asking, what were you doing out there all alone?" Isabel's eyes darted away, and she seemed to shrink in on herself. I got into some trouble." "I had to get away, but I didn't know where to go." Jacob frowned, his concern deepening. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Isabel hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't talk about it. It's complicated. Dangerous." Jacob's heart sank. Dangerous? What had this poor girl gotten herself mixed up in? "Isabel, please, if you're in some kind of trouble, let me help," he urged. "I may not be able to do much, but I can try to get you somewhere safe, or help you contact the authorities, or—" "No!" Isabel exclaimed, her eyes wide with panic. "You don't understand. The authorities, they can't help me. No one can." Jacob fell silent, his mind whirling. Just what had this girl stumbled into, and why was she so terrified of seeking help? As if sensing his growing unease, Isabel sighed and set down the mug, running a hand through her tangled curls. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. It's not fair to you." "Hey, don't apologize," Jacob said quickly. "I want to help, Isabel. Please, tell me what's going on. Maybe I can do something, or at least try to get you somewhere safe." Isabel chewed her lip, her brow furrowed in deep thought. Finally, she lifted her gaze to meet his, and Jacob was struck by the haunted look in her eyes. "My father, he's the leader of the Hell Angels, the biker gang that runs this entire city." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face, his heart pounding in his ears. The Hell Angels, the most notorious, violent criminal organization in the region. And this girl was the daughter of their ruthless leader? He stammered, struggling to find the words. I had no idea." Isabel nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I'm in so much trouble. I tried to run away, but they'll be looking for me. If they find me—" She trailed off, her eyes shimmering with fresh tears. Jacob felt a deep, protective surge rise up within him.
"Isabel, I swear I won't let them hurt you," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You're safe here. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you hidden and get you somewhere they can't find you." Isabel stared at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "But why? Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Jacob reached out and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Because no one deserves to be trapped in a life like that, Isabel. And because—" He paused, his gaze softening. "Because I can see the goodness in you. You're not like them. You deserve a chance to live your own life, free from that kind of darkness." Isabel's lip trembled, and a single tear escaped to trace a glistening path down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Jacob." Jacob smiled reassuringly, his heart swelling with a fierce determination to protect this vulnerable girl. But even as he made his silent vow, a chill of foreboding crept down his spine. The Hell Angels were a force to be reckoned with, ruthless, powerful, and unforgiving.
If they discovered that he was harboring their leader's runaway daughter, he knew he would be venturing into a world of danger that he could scarcely imagine. But looking into Isabel's frightened eyes, he knew there was no choice to make. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Here is a new chapter continuing the story. Jacob watched as Isabel took a shaky sip of her tea, her eyes downcast. His heart ached for the fear and turmoil he could see written all over her delicate features. Whatever she had gotten herself mixed up in, it was clearly something far darker and more dangerous than a simple runaway case. "Isabel," he said gently, "I promise I'll do everything I can to help you, but I need to understand what you're up against. What exactly happened that made you have to flee like this?" Isabel hesitated, chewing her lip nervously. I can't really get into the details. It's just too risky." She lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes pleading. "Please, you have to believe me when I say that the Hell Angels are not people to be trifled with. If they find out I'm here, they'll come after both of us." Jacob's brow furrowed with concern. "So what are we supposed to do? We can't just sit here and wait for them to track you down." Before Isabel could respond, a sudden loud bang from the direction of the front door made them both jump. Jacob felt his heart leap into his throat as he heard the unmistakable sound of the door being kicked in. "Police, freeze!" a gruff voice bellowed. In a blur of motion, several armed officers in tactical gear swarmed into the apartment, their weapons trained on Jacob and Isabel. Panic seized Jacob as he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his mind racing. What was going on? Had the Hell Angels somehow gotten to the authorities? Were they after Isabel all along? "Get down on the ground, hands behind your head," one of the officers barked. Jacob glanced at Isabel, whose face had gone ashen with terror. Slowly, they both sank to their knees, their hands trembling as they complied. As the officers secured them with zip-tie cuffs, Jacob caught Isabel's eye, trying to convey a silent reassurance, but her expression was one of pure, unadulterated fear. "What is the meaning of this?" Jacob demanded. "We haven't done anything wrong." The lead officer glared at him, his expression harsh and unyielding. "Jacob Bryce, you're under arrest for the murder of Isabel Marlowe." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face, his mind reeling. "What? That's impossible. I would never hurt Isabel." Beside him, Isabel let out a small, strangled sound, her eyes brimming with tears. Jacob's heart sank as he realized the devastating truth. Somehow, the police had been led to believe that he had killed this girl he had been trying so desperately to protect. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer intoned, his voice devoid of any hint of sympathy. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the officers hauled Jacob and Isabel to their feet and began to march them out of the apartment, Jacob felt a cold panic grip his heart. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of terrible misunderstanding. But one look at Isabel's anguished face told him that this was no mere misunderstanding. Somehow, some way, they had been set up, and the consequences were going to be devastating. The ride to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and the deafening wail of sirens. Jacob's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had the Hell Angels somehow orchestrated this? Had they framed him for Isabel's murder in order to get her back under their control? When they arrived at the station, Jacob and Isabel were ushered into separate interrogation rooms, each left alone to grapple with the nightmare they now found themselves trapped in.
Jacob paced the small, sterile room, his hands clenching and unclenching as he tried to wrap his mind around the unthinkable accusation. Murder? How could they possibly think he had killed Isabel? The very idea was so ludicrous, so abhorrent, that it made his stomach churn. Time seemed to crawl by as Jacob waited, the silence punctuated only by the occasional muffled sound from beyond the door. Finally, it swung open, and a grim-faced detective entered, a thick file folder clutched in his hand. "Mr. Bryce," the detective began, his tone clipped and businesslike. "I'm Detective Simmons. I have a few questions for you regarding the murder of Isabel Marlowe." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as he fixed the detective with a pleading stare. "Detective, you have to believe me. I didn't kill Isabel. I was trying to help her, to keep her safe." Simmons held up a hand, silencing him. "The evidence we've gathered tells a different story, Mr. Bryce. Forensics place you at the scene of the crime, and we have witnesses who saw you fleeing the area." "What?" Jacob sputtered, his mind reeling. "That's impossible. I never killed anyone. I've never even been to the crime scene." Simmons regarded him coolly. "Then how do you explain the blood evidence, the murder weapon found in your apartment, and the eyewitness accounts?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It seems you have quite a convincing alibi, Mr. Bryce. Care to explain?" Jacob felt his mouth go dry, the blood pounding in his ears. This couldn't be happening. Someone had framed him, and framed him well. But who? And why? His gaze flickered to the folder in Simmons' hand, and a terrible realization dawned on him. "Isabel, where is she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Simmons' expression hardened. "Miss Marlowe is currently being held in custody as a material witness. She's claiming to know nothing about the murder, but we have reason to believe she's withholding information." Jacob's heart sank.
Isabel was being treated like a suspect, or worse, an accomplice. And if the police believed he had killed her, then she must be in terrible danger. "Detective, please," he pleaded. "You have to understand. Isabel is in grave danger. The Hell Angels are after her. She ran away from them, and they'll stop at nothing to get her back. I was trying to protect her, not hurt her." Simmons regarded him impassively. "If that's the case, Mr. Bryce, then why did the evidence point to you as the murderer?" Jacob opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He had no answer, no explanation that would make sense of this nightmare scenario. Someone, somehow, had framed him, and in doing so, had put Isabel's life in jeopardy. As Simmons stood to leave, Jacob felt a surge of desperation. "Detective, you have to believe me. Isabel is innocent. She's in danger, and I'm the only one who can help her. Please, you have to let me see her, to talk to her. Her life depends on it." Simmons paused, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bryce, but until we get to the bottom of this, I can't allow you any contact with the suspect." He turned and headed for the door, leaving Jacob alone in the stark interrogation room, his heart pounding with a fear he had never known. As the door clicked shut, Jacob sank into the chair, his head in his hands. Somehow, some way, he had to find a way to prove his innocence and get to Isabel before it was too late. The Hell Angels were closing in, and if he didn't act fast, the consequences could be devastating. He had promised to keep Isabel safe, and he wasn't about to break that promise, even if it meant risking everything. Here is a new chapter continuing the story with a shocking plot twist. Jacob sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his head in his hands as the reality of the situation sank in. He had been framed for Isabel's murder, and now she was in the hands of the police, in grave danger from the ruthless Hell Angels. The door suddenly burst open, and Jacob looked up to see Detective Simmons storming back in, his face twisted with barely contained fury. "What the hell is going on here, Bryce?" he demanded, slamming a thick folder down on the table. "We just got a call from the chief. He says we've got this all wrong. You're not the killer." Jacob blinked in stunned confusion. "Wait, what? I don't understand." Simmons held up a hand, silencing him. "Turns out the real killer has already confessed, and you're not going to believe who it is." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as Simmons flipped open the folder, revealing a series of gruesome crime scene photos. But it was the face staring back at him from one of the images that made his blood run cold. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Simmons nodded grimly. "Yep, that's right. Isabel Marlowe, the daughter of the infamous Hell Angels leader,
is the one who murdered her own father.
Jacob felt the world spin around him as he tried to process this devastating revelation. Isabel? The terrified, vulnerable girl he had tried to protect? She was the killer? But how? He stammered, his mind reeling. She said she was running away from them, that she was in danger. Simmons let out a humorless laugh. Looks like she was lying through her teeth. According to her confession, she killed her father in cold blood because he was going to force her to marry some high-ranking Hell Angels member. Apparently, she had other plans for her future. Jacob shook his head in disbelief. No, that can't be right. Isabel, she was so scared, so innocent. There's no way she could have done this. The detective's expression hardened. Well, the evidence doesn't lie, Bryce. Forensics matched the murder weapon to her, and she admitted to everything. Seems the little miss had a pretty twisted side to her after all. Jacob's heart sank as the reality of the situation sank in. Isabel, the girl he had tried so desperately to save, was the true murderer. She had used him, played him for a fool, all to cover her own twisted tracks. Where is she now? He asked, his voice hollow. Being transferred to the county jail as we speak, Simmons replied. The chief wants this whole mess cleaned up as soon as possible. Too much political fallout with the Hell Angels involved. Jacob felt a surge of panic. You can't let them take her. The Hell Angels, they'll... Simmons held up a hand, silencing him. Not our problem, Bryce. Isabel Marlowe is the one who's going to have to deal with the consequences of her actions. As far as we're concerned, the case is closed. Without another word, Simmons turned and strode out of the room, leaving Jacob alone with the devastating realization that he had been played for a fool. Isabel, the girl he had tried so hard to protect, was the true villain all along. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Jacob felt a crushing sense of despair. He had been so convinced that Isabel was innocent, that she was in trouble and needed his help. But now, it was clear that she had orchestrated this entire charade, using him as a pawn in her twisted game. And with the Hell Angels now closing in, Isabel's life was in even greater danger than before. Jacob knew that they would show her no mercy, not after what she had done. She was a traitor, a murderer, and the ruthless biker gang would surely make her pay the ultimate price. Suddenly, a thought struck him, sending a chill down his spine. What if Isabel had planned this all along? What if she had deliberately framed him, knowing that the Hell Angels would come after her, just so she could escape their clutches? The more he thought about it, the more it made a twisted kind of sense. Isabel had played the part of the terrified runaway perfectly, luring him in with her vulnerability and desperation. And now, with the police and the Hell Angels closing in, she had orchestrated her own escape, leaving him to take the fall. Jacob felt sick to his stomach. He had fallen for Isabel's act, hook, line, and sinker. And now, not only was he facing the possibility of being wrongfully accused of murder, but Isabel's life was still in grave danger, and he was powerless to do anything about it. Slamming his fist down on the table, Jacob let out a frustrated growl. He had to find a way to stop this, to get to Isabel before the Hell Angels did. But with the police unwilling to listen and the evidence stacked against him, he felt utterly helpless. Suddenly, the door burst open once more, and Jacob looked up to see a familiar face, Detective Simmons, his expression grim. "Bryce, you need to come with me. There's been a development." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as he followed Simmons out of the interrogation room and down the crowded hallway of the police station. What could have happened now? As they approached the holding cells, Simmons turned to him, his face etched with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Isabel Marlowe. She's dead." Jacob felt the world tilt beneath his feet, his mind reeling. "What?" he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Simmons shook his head grimly. "We found her in her cell, throat slit. Looks like the Hell Angels got to her before we could." Jacob felt a wave of nausea wash over him as the reality of the situation sank in. Isabel was dead, murdered by the very people she had tried to escape, and he had been powerless to stop it. But how?
he asked, his voice thick with anguish. "I thought the police were supposed to be protecting her." Simmons let out a heavy sigh. "We were, but it seems the Hell Angels have eyes and ears everywhere. They must have gotten word of her transfer and acted fast." Jacob felt his hands clenching into fists, his entire body trembling with rage and grief. "This is all my fault," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If I hadn't tried to help her, if I hadn't—" Simmons cut him off with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Don't you dare blame yourself, Bryce. This isn't on you. Isabel Marlowe made her own choices, and they led her right into the hands of the Hell Angels. There was nothing you could have done." Jacob shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "But I promised to keep her safe. I should have done more. I should have—" "There's nothing you could have done," Simmons interrupted, his voice softer this time. "The Hell Angels are a ruthless, untouchable force. Even the police can't always protect people from them." Jacob felt a surge of despair wash over him. Isabel was gone, murdered by the very people she had tried to escape, and he had been powerless to stop it, powerless to save the girl he had sworn to protect. As the reality of the situation sank in, Jacob felt a deep, overwhelming sense of guilt and failure.
He had been so convinced that he could help Isabel, that he could keep her safe. But in the end, he had been nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game, a tool to be used and discarded. And now, she was gone, her life cut short by the very darkness she had tried to flee. Jacob felt a lump rise in his throat, the weight of his failure crushing him. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Simmons let out a heavy sigh. "Well, with Isabel gone, the case against you is pretty much dead in the water. We'll have to let you go." Jacob nodded numbly, his mind still reeling. As Simmons led him out of the holding area, he couldn't help but glance back at the empty cell where Isabel had once been. The image of her lifeless body, her throat slit, would be seared into his memory forever. He had failed her, and now she was gone, lost to the darkness that had consumed her. Jacob felt a deep, aching sense of loss, mixed with a burning anger at the cruel, unforgiving world that had taken her from him. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Jacob knew one thing for certain: he would never be the same again. Isabel's death had left a scar on his soul, a wound that would never fully heal, and he swore, in that moment, that he would find a way to make the Hell Angels pay for what they had done, even if it was the last thing he ever did. Here's a new 1,600-word chapter continuing the story with a shocking plot twist. Jacob stumbled out of the police station, his mind reeling from the devastating news. Isabel was dead, murdered by the ruthless Hell Angels while under police protection. It was a crushing blow, and he felt utterly powerless in the face of such cruelty. As he made his way down the dark, deserted street, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that weighed heavily on his heart. If only he had done more to help Isabel, to keep her safe. Maybe then she'd still be alive. He replayed their final moments together over and over in his mind, searching for some clue, some sign that he had missed. But try as he might, he couldn't shake the haunting suspicion that Isabel had been playing him all along. Had she really been the innocent victim she had portrayed, or was there more to her story? The fact that she had confessed to her father's murder only added to the mystery. What had driven her to commit such a heinous act? Jacob shook his head, trying to clear the swirling thoughts. It didn't matter now. Isabel was gone, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his own shattered life. As he turned the corner, he nearly collided with a figure standing in the shadows. Instinctively, Jacob took a step back, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. A familiar voice, one he had hoped never to hear again, responded with a chilling calmness. "Hello, Jacob. We need to talk." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine as Isabel's father, the notorious Hell Angels leader, stepped into the dim light. His piercing gaze seemed to bore into Jacob's soul, and he felt a surge of panic. "You," Jacob stammered. How are you here? I thought the police—" The man raised a hand, silencing him. "The police are incompetent fools. They never stood a chance against me." Jacob swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. You killed Isabel, didn't you?" The man's lips curled into a humorless smile. "No, I did not. My daughter is very much alive." Jacob felt his heart skip a beat. "But the police said—" "The police were mistaken," the man interrupted, his voice cold and calculating. "Isabel is alive, and I need your help to find her." Jacob stared at him, dumbfounded. I don't understand. Why would I help you, after everything you've done?" "Because, Jacob," the man said, his gaze unwavering, "if you don't, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison for the murder of my daughter." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. You framed me?" The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was a necessary precaution. Isabel is a valuable asset, and I couldn't risk her running off again. I needed to ensure her cooperation." Jacob's head was spinning. He had been set up, used as a pawn in a twisted game of power and control. And now, this ruthless criminal was demanding his help, threatening to send him to prison if he refused. "Why should I believe you?" Jacob asked, his voice trembling. "How do I know Isabel is even alive?" The man's expression hardened. "Because if she were dead, I wouldn't be wasting my time talking to you. Isabel is my legacy, Jacob. I won't let her slip through my fingers again." Jacob felt a surge of revulsion. This man didn't care about his daughter's well-being, only his own twisted ambitions. And now he was dragging Jacob into the heart of this dangerous game. "I won't help you," Jacob said, his voice firm. "I won't be a part of this." The man's eyes narrowed, and Jacob saw a flash of anger in his expression. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Jacob. Either you help me find Isabel, or you can rot in prison for the rest of your life." Jacob's head raced, desperately searching for a way out of this impossible situation. But the man's threat hung heavy in the air, and Jacob knew he had no choice. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" A cold smile spread across the man's face. "Good. I knew you'd see things my way." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a set of car keys, tossing them to Jacob. "The car is parked a few blocks down. You'll find everything you need inside. I'll be in touch with further instructions." Jacob caught the keys, his hand trembling. "And if I refuse?" The man's expression darkened. "Then you can say goodbye to your freedom. The choice is yours, Jacob." Without another word, the man turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Jacob alone on the deserted street, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resignation. Slowly, he made his way to the car, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was he getting himself into? And more importantly, was Isabel really alive? As he slid into the driver's seat, Jacob noticed a manila envelope tucked under the sun visor. Hesitantly, he pulled it out and opened it, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the contents. It was a series of photographs, each one more chilling than the last. They showed Isabel, beaten and bruised, her eyes wide with terror. In some of the images, she was bound and gagged. In others, she appeared to be unconscious. Jacob's hands trembled as he flipped through the photos, his heart sinking with each new horror. Whoever had taken these pictures had clearly meant to send a message. Isabel was alive, but she was in grave danger. Swallowing hard, Jacob stuffed the envelope back under the visor, his mind racing. He had to find a way to help Isabel, to get her out of this nightmare. But how? The Hell Angels were a force to be reckoned with, and he was just one man, trapped in a web of lies and threats. As he gripped the steering wheel, Jacob felt a surge of determination. He had promised to protect Isabel, and he wasn't about to break that promise, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. Turning the key in the ignition, Jacob took a deep breath and pulled out onto the deserted street, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't abandon Isabel to the mercy of the Hell Angels. As the car sped through the night, Jacob couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Isabel was hiding and how deep the rabbit hole went. One thing was clear: this was no longer just about clearing his name or protecting an innocent girl. This was a fight for survival, and the stakes had never been higher. Jacob gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. He had to be careful. Every move he made from here on out could mean the difference between life and death.
but he couldn't back down. Not now. Isabel was counting on him, and he couldn't let her down. Not again. As the car ate up the miles, Jacob felt a sense of unease settle over him. He knew he was diving headfirst into a world of darkness and violence, one that he might never be able to escape, but he had no choice. For better or worse, his fate was now intertwined with Isabel's, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The road stretched out before him, a seemingly endless journey into the unknown. Jacob took a deep breath, his mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios, 1,000 different ways this could all go horribly wrong.
But he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. He had to find Isabel, no matter the cost, and he had to do it before it was too late. As the car disappeared into the night, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into a world of danger that he could scarcely imagine. But with Isabel's life hanging in the balance, he knew he had no choice. He was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. Here is a new 1,600-word chapter with a shocking plot twist. Jacob gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as he sped through the dark streets. The photos of Isabel, bruised and terrified, were seared into his mind, fueling his determination to find her and get her to safety. As he drove, his thoughts raced. The Hell Angels leader had made it clear. Either Jacob helped him find Isabel, or he'd rot in prison for a crime he didn't commit. It was an impossible choice, but Jacob knew he had no other option. He had to play along, at least for now, if he had any hope of rescuing Isabel. A shiver ran down his spine as he considered the dangers that lay ahead. The Hell Angels were a ruthless, powerful criminal organization, and he was just one man going up against them. But the thought of Isabel, alone and terrified, trapped in their clutches, was too much to bear. He had to try. He had to save her, no matter the cost. After what felt like an eternity, Jacob pulled up to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This was the address the Hell Angels leader had provided, and Jacob steeled himself as he stepped out of the car, his heart pounding. The heavy metal door creaked open, and Jacob found himself face to face with a hulking figure, one of the Hell Angels' enforcers, no doubt. "You're expected," the man growled, his voice low and menacing. Jacob swallowed hard, but forced himself to nod and follow the man inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the scent of oil and gasoline. Jacob's footsteps echoed as he was led down a long, narrow corridor. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hallway, and the enforcer gestured for Jacob to go inside. Bracing himself, Jacob pushed the door open and stepped into the room. What he saw made his blood run cold. Isabel was there, chained to a chair, her face bruised and her eyes filled with terror. But that wasn't the worst of it. Sitting beside her, a cruel smile on his face, was the Hell Angels leader, Isabel's own father. "Welcome, Jacob," the man said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I am so glad you could join us." Jacob felt his heart pounding in his chest as he took in the scene before him. Isabel was alive, but she was clearly in grave danger, and her own father was the one holding her captive. "What is the meaning of this?" Jacob demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I thought you wanted me to help me find her." The man chuckled, the sound sending a chill down Jacob's spine. "Oh, I already found her, Jacob. Thanks to you, I might add." Jacob's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You see, Jacob, I've been watching you ever since that fateful night when you stumbled upon my daughter in the alley. I knew you would try to help her, that you would become obsessed with protecting her." He paused, his gaze boring into Jacob's. "And that's exactly what I wanted." Jacob felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as the realization dawned on him. You set me up. All of it? The framing, the false murder, it was all part of your plan?" The man nodded, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Precisely. I knew that with the police searching for you, you would be the perfect lure to draw Isabel out of hiding. And I was right." Jacob felt sick to his stomach. He had been played for a fool, a pawn in this man's twisted game. And now,
Isabel's life was in even greater danger than before. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's your daughter, for God's sake." The man's expression darkened. "Isabel is a valuable asset, Jacob. She's the key to my empire, the future of the Hell Angels. I couldn't risk her running off and jeopardizing everything I've built." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And you, well, you were just a convenient means to an end. I knew you would come searching for her, and that's exactly what you did." Jacob felt a surge of anger, his hands clenching into fists. "So what now? Are you going to kill me too?" The man chuckled, the sound sending a chill down Jacob's spine. "Oh no, Jacob, I have something much worse in mind for you." He gestured to the two men standing guard by the door, and they stepped forward, their expressions grim. "Take him away," the man said, his voice cold and detached, "and make sure he doesn't cause any more trouble." Jacob's heart raced as the men grabbed him, their grip tight and unyielding. He struggled, but it was no use. They were too strong, too determined. As they dragged him from the room, Jacob caught one last glimpse of Isabel, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and despair. He wanted to reach out to her, to promise that he would find a way to save her, but the words caught in his throat. The next thing he knew, he was being shoved into a small, cramped room, the door slamming shut behind him. He stumbled, his hands bound tightly, and he felt a wave of panic wash over him. What was going to happen to him? And more importantly, what was going to happen to Isabel? Time seemed to crawl by as Jacob paced the small space, his mind racing. He had to find a way out of this, a way to get to Isabel and get her to safety. But with the Hell Angels leader so deeply entrenched in this twisted game, he knew it wouldn't be easy. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Jacob looked up to see a familiar face, the Hell Angels enforcer who had brought him here. "Time to go, Bryce," the man said, his voice gruff. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as he was led out of the room and down another long, winding corridor. He had no idea where they were taking him, but he knew it couldn't be good. Finally, they reached a heavy steel door, and the enforcer pushed it open, gesturing for Jacob to go inside. Jacob hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "What is this place?" The enforcer's expression remained impassive. "You'll see." With a sense of trepidation, Jacob stepped through the doorway, his eyes adjusting to the dim lighting. What he saw next made his blood run cold. In the center of the room, surrounded by a ring of men, was a fighting cage. And inside it, two figures were locked in a brutal, bloody battle. One of them, Jacob recognized immediately. It was Isabel, her face bloodied and her movements weak and desperate. The other, a hulking, muscular figure, was one of the Hell Angels' most notorious enforcers. Jacob felt a surge of horror as he realized what was happening. Isabel was being forced to fight for her life, pitted against one of the most dangerous men in the organization. "No," he cried out, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't do this." The enforcer grabbed him, his grip like a vice. "Shut up and watch," he hissed. "This is what happens to traitors." Jacob struggled against the man's hold, his heart pounding in his ears. He had to do something, anything, to save Isabel. But as he watched her falter, her movements growing weaker, he knew there was nothing he could do. The brutal fight raged on, and Jacob felt a sickening sense of helplessness wash over him. Isabel was fighting for her life, and he was powerless to stop it. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the enforcer landed a devastating blow, and Isabel crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Jacob let out an anguished cry, tears streaming down his face. "Isabel!" The men around the cage erupted into a chorus of cheers and jeers, their voices echoing through the cavernous room. The enforcer stood over Isabel's motionless body, a cruel smile on his face. That's what happens to those who cross the Hell Angels. Jacob felt a surge of rage and despair wash over him. Isabel was gone, killed at the very people she had tried to escape, and he had been powerless to stop it. As the men dragged him away, Jacob's mind raced, searching for a way to escape, to find a way to get justice for Isabel. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was trapped, caught in a web of lies and violence that he could never hope to escape. The Hell Angels had won, and Isabel had paid the ultimate price. Jacob felt a crushing sense of guilt and despair, knowing that he had been used as a pawn in this twisted game, and that his failure had cost Isabel her life.
As he was led away, Jacob couldn't shake the haunting image of Isabel's lifeless body, her eyes staring blankly into the distance. It was a sight that would be seared into his memory forever, a constant reminder of the price he had paid for trying to help her. And in the depths of his anguish, Jacob swore that he would find a way to make the Hell Angels pay for their cruelty, no matter the cost. Isabel's death would not be in vain, and he would stop at nothing to bring down the criminal empire that had destroyed her. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but Jacob knew that he had to keep going, driven by the memory of the brave, beautiful girl who had captured his heart. He would find a way to honor her memory, even if it meant risking everything he had. The future was a mystery, shrouded in shadows. But one thing was clear: Jacob's life had been irrevocably changed by the tragic events that had unfolded, and he would never be the same again. Here is the final 1,600-word chapter to conclude the story. The days that followed Isabel's death were the darkest of my life. I was consumed by grief, guilt, and a burning desire for vengeance that threatened to consume me whole. The Hell Angels had taken everything from me: my freedom, my chance at redemption, and the life of the girl I had sworn to protect. After they dragged me from that hellish fighting cage, I was thrown into a cramped, windowless cell, left alone with my thoughts and the haunting image of Isabel's lifeless body. I paced the tiny space, my mind racing, searching for a way to escape, to find justice for what had been done. But the walls were solid, the guards ever vigilant. I was trapped, a prisoner in the very darkness I had tried to save Isabel from. Days turned to weeks, and still I languished in that cell, my hope slowly fading with each passing moment. I'd lost everything: my freedom, my life, and the chance to make things right. Isabel was gone, and it was all my fault. Then, one day, the door to my cell creaked open, and a familiar face peered in: Detective Simmons. I stared at him in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. "Simmons?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from lack of use. "What are you doing here?" The detective's expression was grim as he stepped into the cell, closing the door behind him. "Bryce, we need to talk." I felt a glimmer of hope flare to life within me. "Have you found a way to get me out of here, to prove my innocence?" Simmons shook his head, his eyes downcast. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Bryce. The evidence against you is overwhelming." My heart sank. "So, what then? Are you just here to rub it in?" Simmons let out a heavy sigh. "No, Bryce. I'm here to offer you a chance to make things right." I stared at him, confusion etched on my face. "What are you talking about?" "Look," Simmons said, his voice low and urgent. "The Hell Angels have been terrorizing this city for years. We've tried to stop them, but they're too powerful, too well connected. But now, with Isabel's death," he paused, his expression pained, "we have a chance to bring them down, once and for all." I felt a surge of anger at the mention of Isabel's name. "And what does that have to do with me? In case you haven't noticed, I'm the one rotting in a cell, while the Hell Angels are still out there, untouchable." Simmons leaned in, his eyes burning with intensity. "That's where you're wrong, Bryce. You have a chance to make a difference, to get justice for Isabel." I scoffed, the bitterness I felt seeping into my voice. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that, locked up in here?" "By working with us," Simmons said, his expression earnest. "We need someone on the inside, someone who can help us take down the Hell Angels from the inside out." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "You want me to what, exactly?" Simmons reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing it into my palm. "This is a wire. If you agree to help us, we can get you out of here, get you back into the Hell Angels' inner circle. All you have to do is gather information, help us build a case against them." I shook my head, the weight of what he was asking nearly crushing me. "You're asking me to risk my life, Simmons. The Hell Angels, they'll kill me if they find out." Simmons nodded solemnly. "I know. But this is our best chance to get justice for Isabel and to stop the Hell Angels once and for all. Are you willing to do it?"
I stared down at the tiny device in my hand, my heart pounding. Isabel's face flashed through my mind, her eyes filled with fear and desperation. I had failed her once before. I couldn't let that happen again. "All right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Simmons let out a breath I didn't even realize he'd been holding. "Thank you, Bryce. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing the right thing." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a set of keys. "I'm going to get you out of here. You'll meet with my team, and they'll brief you on what you need to do." As he unlocked the cell door, I felt a surge of trepidation. "And if I get caught?" Simmons paused, his expression grave. "Then you're on your own, Bryce. The Hell Angels don't take kindly to traitors." I swallowed hard, the weight of what I was about to do settling onto my shoulders like a heavy burden. But I knew I had no choice. Isabel's memory demanded justice, and if this was the only way to get it, then so be it. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the cell, Simmons at my side. As we made our way through the maze of corridors, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. I was about to dive headfirst into the heart of the darkness, and I had no idea if I would ever make it out alive. The meeting with Simmons' team was a blur of information and instructions. They laid out the plan, the risks, the potential rewards.
All I had to do was infiltrate the Hell Angels, gather evidence, and help them bring the entire organization crashing down. Easy, they said. Yeah, right. As I stood outside the nondescript building that would be my new home, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it. My last chance at redemption. My shot at making things right. For Isabel. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I slowly worked my way into the Hell Angels' inner circle. It wasn't easy. These guys were hardened criminals, and they didn't trust easily. But with Simmons' team feeding me information and coaching me every step of the way, I managed to gradually earn their trust. And then the day came when I was finally brought before the Hell Angels' leader, Isabel's own father. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he saw me, a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "So, you're the one they sent to replace my daughter," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, sir. I'm here to serve the Hell Angels in any way I can." He studied me for a long, agonizing moment, and I could almost feel the weight of Isabel's memory pressing down on me. But I held his gaze, refusing to let my fear show. Finally, he nodded, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Very well. Welcome to the family, Jacob." And just like that, I was in. Over the next few weeks and months, I worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, feeding information to Simmons' team, and waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a delicate dance, balancing my role as a trusted member of the Hell Angels with my true mission of bringing them down. One wrong move, one slip-up, and it would all be over. But I couldn't afford to fail. Not again. The day of the final raid came, and I found myself at the heart of the Hell Angels headquarters, surrounded by the very people I was betraying. My hands shook as I listened to the team's instructions in my earpiece, my mind racing with 1,000 different scenarios. And then the signal came. Simmons and his team stormed the building, guns blazing, and all hell broke loose. Gunshots echoed through the corridors, and I found myself caught in the crossfire, ducking and weaving as I tried to make my way to safety. In the chaos, I caught sight of Isabel's father, his expression a mix of rage and terror. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw the realization dawn on him that I had been the one to betray him all along. With a roar of fury, he charged at me, his hands outstretched, intent on wringing the life from me. But just as he reached me, a shot rang out, and he crumpled to the ground, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. I turned to see Simmons, his gun still raised, his expression grim. "It's over, Bryce," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of the battle. "We got him." I stood there, trembling, the weight of what I had done finally sinking in. Isabel's father was dead, the Hell Angels' empire crumbling around us. After all this time, after all the pain and sacrifice, justice had been served. But as I looked around at the carnage, the broken bodies and shattered dreams, I felt nothing but a profound sense of sadness. Isabel was still gone, and no amount of vengeance could bring her back. In the end, I suppose I did what I had to do. I helped take down the Hell Angels to honor Isabel's memory and ensure that no one else would have to suffer the way she did. But the cost was high, and I knew that I would carry the scars of this ordeal with me for the rest of my life. As I walked away from the smoking ruins of the Hell Angels headquarters, I couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet triumph. Isabel was gone, but her memory lived on, a beacon of hope in the darkness that had consumed her. And in that moment, I knew that I would never forget her, never stop fighting to make the world a better place in her honor. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to see it through, for Isabel and for all the others who had fallen victim to the Hell Angels' cruelty. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would dedicate my life to making sure that no one else would have to suffer the way she did. It was a heavy burden to bear, but one I was willing to carry, no matter the cost. Isabel's legacy would live on, and I would make sure of it, even if it meant sacrificing everything I had. With a deep breath, I turned and headed into the uncertain future, my heart heavy, but my resolve unwavering. This was my chance to make things right, to honor the memory of the girl who had touched my life in ways I could never have imagined. And I wasn't about to let her down, not again.